A decorated courthouse deputy humiliates a black woman in front of dozens of witnesses, never suspecting she holds the key to every badge in the state. I said get your hands where I can see them, now. You people always think you can go wherever you want. Metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists so tight the bones in her hands screamed. Dr. Denise Carter stood frozen, her breath stolen, as every eye in that marble lobby locked onto her like she was a criminal being dragged to booking. Deputy Brian Hollister puffed his chest, his pale face twisted with the kind of satisfaction that comes from years of unchecked authority, 22 years on the force, and he'd never once been questioned by anyone who mattered. But this time, he'd grabbed the wrong woman, and he had exactly 47 seconds before his entire world collapsed. Part 1. The Woman in the Charcoal Suit. The Fulton County Courthouse in downtown Atlanta opened its bronze doors at exactly 7:45 a.m. on that humid Tuesday morning in September. Most people who walked through those doors were nervous. Defendants awaiting trial. Families hoping for mercy. Attorneys clutching files like shields. But Dr. Denise Elaine Carter wasn't nervous. She was focused. At 58 years old, Denise had spent 34 years in the legal system. First as a public defender in the roughest neighborhoods of Southside Chicago, then as an assistant U.S. attorney, then as a federal judge for the Northern District of Georgia. She'd sentenced drug kingpins. She'd freed innocent men wrongly convicted. She'd stared down mob lawyers and congressional witnesses and never once blinked. And 3 months ago, the governor of Georgia had appointed her to the most powerful law enforcement oversight position in the state, chairwoman of the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. Post, as everyone called it. The body that certified every single police officer, sheriff's deputy, and correctional officer in Georgia. The body that could, with a single vote, strip an officer of their badge permanently. Denise had taken the job because she believed in accountability. She believed that good officers deserved protection and bad officers deserved consequences. She believed that a badge was a sacred trust, not a weapon. And today, she was visiting the Fulton County Courthouse to meet with Chief Judge Harold Morrison about implementing new training protocols for courthouse security personnel. A routine meeting. An important meeting. A meeting that would change everything, but not in any way she'd expected. Denise walked through the front entrance wearing a tailored charcoal pantsuit, low heels, and small gold earrings that had belonged to her mother. Her silver-streaked locks were pulled back in an elegant bun. Her leather briefcase, worn soft from decades of use, hung from her left shoulder. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman of authority, intelligence, and grace. But she also looked like something else. Something that made certain people uncomfortable. She looked like a black woman who belonged nowhere and everywhere at the same time. The security checkpoint was crowded that morning. Denise placed her briefcase on the X-ray belt, stepped through the metal detector, and collected her belongings on the other side. No alarms. No issues. She smiled politely at the young security officer who handed back her bag. "Thank you," she said. "Have a good day," he replied. Routine. Normal. But here's the part that changed everything. Denise needed to reach the 5th floor, where Chief Judge Morrison's chambers were located. The public elevators were packed, a long line of people waiting with crying babies and impatient attorneys and elderly witnesses leaning on canes. But there was another elevator. A service elevator near the back hallway. It was technically reserved for authorized personnel, judges, clerks, certain attorneys with clearance. Denise had clearance. She'd received her courthouse credentials 2 weeks ago, laminated and official, with her photo and title printed clearly. Dr. Denise E. Carter. Chairwoman, Georgia Post Council. Authorized access, all areas. She pulled the lanyard from her briefcase and hung it around her neck as she walked toward the restricted hallway. The corridor was quiet. Marble floors. Brass wall sconces. The smell of old wood and older justice. She was halfway to the elevator when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy. Fast. Getting closer. Hey! Hey! Denise turned. A courthouse deputy was striding toward her, his hand already resting on his duty belt. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with a ruddy face, thinning blonde hair, and eyes that seemed to be searching for a reason to be angry. His nameplate read, Hollister. "Can I help you?" Denise asked calmly. Deputy Brian Hollister stopped 3 feet away, looking her up and down like she was a math problem he'd already decided was wrong. What do you think you're doing back here? Denise kept her voice even. I'm heading to Judge Morrison's chambers. 5th floor. Hollister snorted. This corridor is authorized personnel only. Public elevators are back that way. He jerked his thumb toward the crowded lobby. Denise gestured to the credential hanging from her neck. I have authorization. I don't care what that says. Hollister's voice cut her off like a knife. I don't know you. I've never seen you before. And I've been working this courthouse for 22 years. He stepped closer. So either you got that badge from somewhere you shouldn't have, or someone made a mistake. Either way, you need to turn around and go back where you came from. Denise felt her pulse quicken, but her face remained stone. She'd been in this situation before. Not exactly this situation, but situations like it. Situations where her credentials meant nothing because her skin meant everything. Deputy Hollister, she said slowly, I understand you're doing your job. But I assure you, my authorization is legitimate. If you'd like, you can call. I'm not calling anybody. He unclipped the radio from his belt but didn't use it. Just held it. Like a prop. Like a threat. What I'm going to do is escort you back to the public area. And if you give me any trouble at all, we're going to have a different conversation. Denise stood her ground. I'm not leaving. I have a meeting with Chief Judge Morrison in 15 minutes, and I intend to be there. Something flickered in Hollister's eyes. Something ugly. Oh, is that right? He said softly. You have a meeting with the Chief Judge? He laughed, a single, sharp bark of disbelief. Lady, I've watched every kind of scammer and con artist walk through these doors. People claiming to be lawyers, claiming to be witnesses, claiming to be family members. You know what they all have in common? He leaned forward. They all think they're smarter than me. Be honest, what would you have done in her position? Denise took a slow breath. Deputy, I'm going to reach into my briefcase and show you additional identification. My driver's license, my judicial credentials from my former position, and a letter from the governor's office confirming my appointment. Will you allow me to do that? Hollister's jaw tightened. Don't move. I'm not moving. I'm asking permission. I said don't move. He took another step forward, and now he was close enough that Denise could smell coffee on his breath and see the broken capillaries in his nose. You're going to turn around, walk back to the lobby, and wait there until I figure out who you are and what you're really doing here. And if I refuse? The words came out before Denise could stop them. Not loud. Not angry. Just a question. A simple question. But to Brian Hollister, it was gasoline on a fire. His face flushed crimson. If you refuse? He unclipped his handcuffs. Then I'm placing you under arrest for trespassing, resisting lawful orders, and criminal impersonation. How does that sound? Denise felt her heart hammering now, but she'd be damned if she showed it. It sounds like you're making the biggest mistake of your career. Hollister grabbed her arm. Part 2, the humiliation. What happened next took less than 30 seconds. But it would be replayed millions of times in the weeks to come. Hollister spun Denise around, her shoulder wrenching painfully as he forced her hands behind her back. You're under arrest, he snarled. You have the right to remain silent. Deputy, stop. You're making an error. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The handcuffs clicked. Cold metal. Too tight. Denise felt the steel biting into her wrists, pressing against the bones so hard she gasped. You're hurting me. Should have thought about that before you decided to play dress-up. He grabbed the credential around her neck and yanked it off, the lanyard snapping against her skin. Chairwoman of Post. He laughed out loud. Sure you are. And I'm the governor of Georgia. He shoved her forward. Walk. They emerged into the main lobby, and every head turned. The security officers at the checkpoint. The families waiting in line. The attorneys with their files. The elderly witnesses with their canes. All of them staring. All of them watching this distinguished black woman being marched through the courthouse in handcuffs like a common criminal. Denise felt the heat rising in her face. Not embarrassment. Something deeper. Something older. The weight of history pressing down on her shoulders like chains. Hollister pushed her toward a wooden bench near the information desk. Sit. She Saturday. He stood over her, triumphant, his thumbs hooked in his belt like a conquering hero. Sergeant Miller, he called out to another deputy. We got a live one. Trespassing in the restricted corridor. Fake credentials. Possible impersonation. Sergeant Miller, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, walked over slowly. He looked at Denise. He looked at her handcuffs. He looked at the broken credential lanyard still dangling from Hollister's fist. Brian, what's going on? Found her sneaking toward the service elevator. Claims she's got a meeting with Chief Judge Morrison. Claims she's the head of post. Hollister shook his head. Can you believe that? Miller's brow furrowed. Did you verify her credentials? Don't need to verify. I know a scammer when I see one. Miller looked at Denise again. Something in his expression shifted. Caution. Maybe concern. What's your name? Before Denise could answer, Hollister cut in. Doesn't matter what she says. We'll sort it out when we book her. But Miller wasn't looking at Hollister anymore. He was looking at Denise's face. At her suit. At her leather briefcase, now lying abandoned on the floor where Hollister had thrown it. Brian. Miller's voice was quiet. Brian, I think you should let me make a call. I'm not making any calls. I'm taking her to holding. That's procedure. Brian. I said that's procedure. But here's the part no one saw coming. The elevator at the far end of the lobby chimed. The doors slid open. And Chief Judge Harold Morrison stepped out. He was 71 years old, white-haired, and walked with a slight limp from a hip replacement 2 years ago. He'd served on the bench for 38 years. He'd known Denise Carter for 15 of them. Morrison spotted the commotion immediately. His eyes swept across the lobby, the staring crowd, the deputies clustered near the bench, the woman in handcuffs. And then his face went pale. What in God's name? He walked faster than anyone had seen him move in years. Denise! She looked up at him. Her voice was steady, but her eyes told a different story. Hello, Harold. Morrison's gaze snapped to Hollister. Deputy, why is this woman in handcuffs? Hollister puffed up his chest. Sir, I apprehended her in the restricted corridor. She was attempting to access the service elevator without proper authorization. She claimed to have credentials, but they were clearly. Did you check with anyone before arresting her? Sir, I've been doing this for 22 years. I can spot her. Did you check? Morrison's voice cracked like thunder. Hollister faltered. No, sir, but. Take off the handcuffs. Now. Judge Morrison, with all due respect, I have procedures to follow, Anne. I said now. The lobby went silent. Not the silence of absence, the silence of held breath. Every eye locked on the scene. Hollister's face had gone from triumphant red to confused pink to terrified white in the span of 15 seconds. Sir, I don't understand. Morrison stepped so close to Hollister that their faces were inches apart. Let me help you understand, Deputy. The woman you just arrested, the woman you just humiliated in front of this entire courthouse, is Dr. Denise Carter. Former federal judge. Current chairwoman of the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. He paused. Do you know what that means? Hollister's mouth opened. Nothing came out. It means she's the person who certifies every law enforcement officer in this state. It means she's the person who can decertify any officer who abuses their badge. Morrison's voice dropped to a whisper. It means she owns your career, Deputy. And you just put her in handcuffs. If only Hollister had known who he was talking to. The handcuffs came off. But the damage was done. Denise rubbed her wrists, feeling the indentations where the metal had pressed too tight for too long. Already, she could see bruises forming. Purple shadows against brown skin. Evidence. She looked up at Hollister, and for the first time, she spoke with the full weight of her authority. Deputy Hollister, I'm going to ask you some questions. I advise you to answer truthfully. He stood frozen, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. Did you ask for my name before placing me in handcuffs? Yes, but you. Did you verify my credentials with any supervisor? There wasn't time to. Did you use any racial language during our encounter? What? No. I never. You said, and I quote, "You people always think you can go wherever you want." Is that correct? Hollister's eyes widened. Behind him, Sergeant Miller closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. I didn't mean. You also said I was playing dress-up. Is that correct? I was just. And you threw my credentials on the ground and laughed when you read my title. Is that correct? Silence. Dead, damning silence. Denise turned to Sergeant Miller. Sergeant, I need you to preserve all security footage from this incident. Every camera angle. Every second. Am I understood? Miller nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. She turned to Judge Morrison. Harold, I apologize. I won't be able to make our meeting today. Something's come up. Morrison looked at her with something like awe. Denise, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. You have nothing to apologize for. She picked up her briefcase from the floor, brushed the dust from its leather surface, and straightened her jacket. Then she looked at Hollister one final time. Deputy, you'll be hearing from my office. I suggest you retain legal counsel. She walked toward the main exit. Every eye in the lobby followed her. And as she pushed through the bronze doors into the Atlanta sunlight, she could feel the shift. The shift from victim to victor. The shift that always came when truth met power and power blinked. But this was only the beginning. 24 hours later, Brian Hollister's world started collapsing. The incident at the courthouse had been captured on 4 different security cameras, each from a different angle. The footage was crystal clear. Hollister's aggression. Denise's calm. The racial language. The rough handling. The humiliation. Everything. By noon that day, the footage had been requested by 3 different entities. The Georgia Post Council, initiating an emergency review of Hollister's certification. The Fulton County Sheriff's Office, launching an internal affairs investigation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation, assessing potential civil rights violations. Hollister sat in a small conference room at the sheriff's administrative offices, surrounded by lawyers and investigators. His union representative was there. His immediate supervisor was there. Everyone looked grim. Deputy Hollister, the lead investigator began, can you explain why you chose to arrest Dr. Carter without verifying her credentials? Hollister shifted in his seat. I've been working that courthouse for 22 years. I know everyone who's authorized to be in those corridors. I'd never seen her before. She didn't look like someone who belonged there. What does someone who belongs there look like? Hollister hesitated. I mean, judges and attorneys usually look, they have a certain. He trailed off. Everyone in the room knew what he meant. Everyone in the room knew he couldn't say it. The investigator slid a photograph across the table. It showed Hollister's hand gripping Denise's arm, his face twisted with anger. Is there a reason you used this level of force on a woman who was cooperating with your instructions? She wasn't cooperating. She refused to leave the corridor. Did she threaten you? No. Did she attempt to flee? No. Did she physically resist in any way? She asked me questions. She challenged my authority. By asking to show you additional identification. Hollister's face reddened. She had an attitude. An attitude. Yeah. Like she thought she was better than me. The investigator sat back in his chair. Deputy Hollister, we've pulled your personnel file. Did you know you have 11 prior complaints for excessive force and racial bias? Hollister's lawyer leaned forward. Those complaints were never sustained. They were never properly investigated, the investigator corrected. There's a difference. He opened a folder. In 2019, a black attorney named Marcus Williams filed a complaint stating that you demanded he prove his bar membership before allowing him to enter a courtroom. The complaint was marked unfounded after a single interview with your supervisor. He flipped to another page. In 2020, a black woman named Keisha Thompson filed a complaint stating that you followed her through the courthouse for 15 minutes because you didn't recognize her. The complaint was marked resolved informally. Another page. In 2021, a black pastor named Reverend James Okonkwo filed a complaint stating that you questioned his right to be in a restricted area even after he showed credentials signed by the chief judge himself. The complaint was marked no action warranted. The investigator looked up. There's a pattern here, Deputy. Do you see it? Hollister's jaw tightened. Those people were all making things up. They didn't like being questioned, so they cried racism. All of them? Yes. Every single one? Yes. The investigator closed the folder. Deputy Hollister, this interview is concluded. You'll remain on administrative leave pending the outcome of multiple investigations. Do not discuss this matter with anyone outside your legal counsel. But here's where the story took its first major turn. Twist number 1, 40%. 2 days after the incident, a young woman named Jasmine Brooks walked into the offices of the Georgia Post Council. She was 31 years old, a paralegal at a small firm in Decatur. And she had a story to tell. I saw what happened to Dr. Carter on the news, Jasmine said, sitting across from Denise in a conference room. And I knew I had to come forward. Because the same thing happened to me. Denise leaned forward. Tell me. Jasmine took a breath. 3 years ago, I was at the Fulton County Courthouse for a hearing. I was there on behalf of my firm, carrying documents for one of our attorneys. I had a badge. I had authorization. But Deputy Hollister stopped me in the main hallway. Her voice trembled slightly. He said I looked suspicious. He said my badge didn't look right. He made me wait for 45 minutes while he supposedly verified my credentials. I missed the hearing. My attorney was furious, but not at Hollister. At me. Denise's expression was unreadable. Did you file a complaint? Jasmine nodded. I did. A week later, I got a letter saying the complaint was unfounded. No investigation. No interview with me. Nothing. She paused. But that's not why I'm here. She reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet. After Dr. Carter was arrested, I started doing research. I wanted to see if there were other women like me. Other black women that Hollister had targeted. She tapped the tablet screen. There are 23 of us, Dr. Carter. 23 black women who have been stopped, questioned, detained, or humiliated by Deputy Brian Hollister over the past 10 years. And not a single complaint resulted in any discipline. Denise stared at the screen. 23 names. 23 faces. 23 women who had been made to feel like criminals in their own courthouse. Some of them are attorneys, Jasmine continued. Some are court reporters. Some are social workers. Some are just family members trying to support their loved ones. Every single one of them is black. Every single one of them was treated like a suspect. She looked up at Denise. We've been dismissed for years. Ignored. Told we were exaggerating. But now that it happened to someone like you, someone they can't ignore, maybe finally someone will listen. Denise sat in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. Ms. Brooks, I want you to give me every name on that list. Every complaint number. Every piece of documentation you can find. Why? Denise's eyes were steel. Because I'm not just going to end Brian Hollister's career. I'm going to expose the entire system that protected him. If only Hollister knew what was coming next. Part 5, The Alliance. Over the next 2 weeks, Denise assembled a team. Investigators from Post. Attorneys from the Georgia Attorney General's office. Advocates from civil rights organizations. And the 23 women. They gathered in a conference room in downtown Atlanta, a long table surrounded by women of different ages, different professions, different backgrounds. But all of them black. All of them targeted. All of them ready to speak. Denise stood at the head of the table. I want to be clear about something, she said. What happened to me was wrong. It was humiliating. It was degrading. But it was also not unique. She gestured around the room. Each of you experienced something similar, or worse. And each of you was failed by a system that was supposed to protect you. She paused. I can't undo what happened. But I can promise you this, by the time we're finished, Brian Hollister will never wear a badge again. And the people who protected him will be held accountable. A woman named Angela Morrison, no relation to the judge, raised her hand. Dr. Carter, I appreciate what you're doing. But I want to know, why now? Why did it take this happening to you for anyone to care? The room went quiet. It was a fair question. A painful question. A necessary question. Denise nodded slowly. You're right to ask that. And here's the honest answer, it shouldn't have taken this. Your complaints, all of your complaints, should have been investigated properly the first time. The system failed you. She took a breath. I can't change the past. But I can use my position to make sure the future is different. Not just for us, but for every black woman who walks into that courthouse after us. Angela studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right. I'm in. One by one, the other women nodded too. The alliance was formed. The investigation expanded. And the walls around Brian Hollister began to close in. Would you have stayed quiet in their position? 3 weeks after the incident, the story went public. Not just locally. Nationally. The headline in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution read, Courthouse deputy arrested black women 4 decades, complaints ignored by supervisors. The story included interviews with 8 of the 23 women, security footage from the incident with Denise, and internal documents showing how complaints had been systematically dismissed. CNN picked it up. Then MSNBC. Then The Washington Post. Then The New York Times. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. #Justice for Denise trended nationally. Brian Hollister's photograph was on every screen. And the Fulton County Sheriff's Office was in full damage control mode. Sheriff Patricia Donovan, a career law enforcement officer who had served for 30 years, held a press conference outside the courthouse. This department does not tolerate discrimination of any kind, she said, her voice tight. Deputy Hollister has been terminated effective immediately. We are conducting a full review of all previous complaints against him, as well as our internal processes for handling bias allegations. A reporter raised her hand. Sheriff, 11 complaints were filed against Deputy Hollister over the past decade. How is it possible that none of them resulted in discipline? Donovan hesitated. That's what we're investigating. But you were the head of internal affairs for 5 of those years. Shouldn't you have caught this pattern? Donovan's face went red. I can't comment on specific personnel matters. Sheriff, did you personally review any of the complaints against Hollister? I need to move on to other questions. Sheriff, are you going to resign? The press conference dissolved into chaos. But that wasn't the biggest development. No. The biggest development came 48 hours later. Denise was in her office at Post headquarters when her assistant walked in with a thick manila envelope. This just came from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, the assistant said. They said it's urgent. Denise opened the envelope. Inside were documents. Financial records. Bank statements. Wire transfers. And a preliminary report that made her heart stop. According to the GBI, Brian Hollister had been receiving payments from a private security company called Sentinel Protection Services. Over the past 8 years, Sentinel had deposited nearly $80,000 into an account in Hollister's wife's name. Sentinel Protection Services was owned by a man named Gerald McKinnon, a former deputy who had left the sheriff's office under investigation for evidence tampering. And here's where it got interesting. Sentinel had contracts with bail bondsmen, defense attorneys, and private investigation firms who frequently worked cases in Fulton County. The payments to Hollister? They were bribes. For information. For case details. For tip-offs about which defendants were being transported and when. But that wasn't all. The GBI report noted that Hollister's aggressive targeting of black women wasn't just racism, though it was certainly that. It was also a cover. By constantly stopping, questioning, and detaining people in the courthouse corridors, Hollister created chaos. Distraction. And during those distractions, certain documents went missing from clerks' offices. Certain evidence was mishandled. Certain cases fell apart. Denise read the report 3 times. Then she called her lead investigator. We need to expand the scope of our inquiry. This isn't just about one racist deputy. This is about systematic corruption. What do you want me to do? Everything. I want everything. Every case Hollister touched. Every document that went missing while he was on duty. Every acquittal that doesn't make sense. She paused. And I want Gerald McKinnon brought in for questioning. Today. The dominoes began to fall. Part 7. The Unraveling. Gerald McKinnon was arrested the following week. The charges: bribery, racketeering, obstruction of justice. When confronted with the evidence, McKinnon did what corrupt men always do when the walls close in. He talked. He talked about the bribes. He talked about the missing documents. He talked about the network of deputies, clerks, and attorneys who had been working together to manipulate cases for paying clients. And he talked about who was really in charge. The name McKinnon gave wasn't Brian Hollister. It wasn't even someone in the sheriff's office. It was Captain Lawrence Decker, the head of courthouse security for Fulton County. Hollister's direct supervisor. The man who had dismissed 11 complaints against his deputy. The man who had protected him for a decade. The man who had been getting 30% of every bribe. Captain Decker was arrested at his home at 6 a.m. on a Thursday morning, still in his bathrobe, his wife screaming at the FBI agents dragging him to their car. The charges: conspiracy, bribery, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice. The news hit like an earthquake. Not just in Atlanta. Across the state. Across the country. The sheriff, Patricia Donovan, resigned the same day. She claimed she had no knowledge of the corruption. No one believed her. Within a month, 14 people connected to the courthouse scheme were indicted. Deputies, clerks, attorneys, bail bondsmen. All of them linked by greed and a system designed to punish the vulnerable while rewarding the powerful. And at the center of it all, the thread that pulled everything apart, was a single incident. A single moment of arrogance. A racist deputy putting handcuffs on the wrong woman. Brian Hollister's criminal trial began 4 months after his arrest. The charges: assault, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. The prosecution's case was devastating. 23 witnesses testified about Hollister's pattern of targeting black women. Security footage showed his aggressive treatment of Denise. Financial records proved his involvement in the bribery scheme. And his own words, recorded by courthouse cameras, became the most damning evidence of all. "You people always think you can go wherever you want." The prosecution played that clip 16 times. By the end, even the defense attorney looked like he wanted to disappear. Hollister took the stand in his own defense. "It was a disaster. I was just doing my job," he said, his voice rising with desperation. "I was protecting the courthouse. I didn't know who she was. Anyone could fake a badge." "Deputy Hollister," the prosecutor interrupted, "did you ever question a white woman's credentials in that corridor?" Silence. "Did you ever handcuff a white woman for walking toward the service elevator?" Silence. "Did you ever throw a white woman's badge on the floor and laugh?" "That's not, I didn't." "Yes or no, deputy?" "No. No. Because it wasn't about protection, was it? It was about who you thought deserved to be in that space. And Dr. Carter, because of her race, didn't make the cut." Hollister's voice cracked. "I'm not a racist. I have black friends. I've helped black people." The prosecutor held up a photograph. It showed Denise's wrists, purple and bruised from the handcuffs. "Is this what helping looks like, deputy?" The courtroom was silent. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Part 9. The sentencing. The sentencing hearing took place on a cold morning in January. The courtroom was packed. Media. Advocates. The 23 women. And Denise. Brian Hollister stood before Judge Cassandra Flowers, a black woman, by random assignment of the court calendar, and waited for his fate. "Deputy Hollister," Judge Flowers began, "you spent 22 years wearing a badge. 22 years with the authority to protect or to harm. And you chose harm. She looked at him over her glasses. You targeted women who looked like me. Women who had every right to be in that courthouse. Women who trusted that the law would protect them. And instead, you humiliated them. You degraded them. You made them feel like criminals in a place where they had come seeking justice. She paused. But your actions went beyond bias. You participated in a scheme to corrupt the very institution you swore to serve. You took bribes. You covered for criminals. You betrayed everything a badge is supposed to represent. Hollister's head dropped. I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison. You will be ineligible for parole for a minimum of 8 years. Upon release, you will never work in law enforcement again. She set down her papers. Your career is over. Your freedom is over. And the women you wronged, they will move forward with their heads held high while you spend the next decade in a cell. She picked up her gavel. Court is adjourned. The sound of that gavel was like thunder. Like freedom. Like justice too long delayed finally arriving. Part 10. The Aftermath. In the months that followed, the ripples from the Hollister case spread across Georgia. The Post Council, under Denise's leadership, implemented sweeping reforms. All complaints of racial bias would now require independent investigation. All officers would undergo mandatory implicit bias training. All departments would submit annual reports on complaint patterns and outcomes. And any department that failed to comply would lose its certification, meaning its officers could no longer legally serve. The Fulton County Courthouse implemented new protocols. Enhanced de-escalation training. Supervisor notification for all detentions. Automatic review of any complaint involving a protected class. And a new oversight committee that included community members, real people from real neighborhoods who could hold power accountable. The 23 women filed a civil lawsuit against the county. They won. The settlement, $14.7 million, divided among the plaintiffs based on the severity of their experiences. But more importantly, the settlement included a requirement that the county fund a new civil rights center in downtown Atlanta, a place where victims of official misconduct could receive free legal help. The center was named after Denise's mother, the Lillian Carter Center for Justice. Angela Morrison, the woman who had asked why it took this happening to Denise for anyone to care, became the center's first executive director. It shouldn't have taken a judge being arrested for us to be heard, she said at the opening ceremony. But it did. So we're going to make sure that from now on, every voice matters. Every complaint counts. Every woman, black, brown, or any color, is treated with the dignity she deserves. Denise stood in the crowd, watching Angela cut the ribbon. She thought about all the moments that had led to this. The handcuffs clicking around her wrists. The eyes of strangers watching her humiliation. The fury that had burned in her chest like a star. And the choice she'd made, not to seek revenge, but to seek change. But here's the part that mattered most. 1 year after the incident, Denise received a letter. It came to her office in a plain white envelope, handwritten address, no return name. She almost threw it away. But something made her open it. The letter was from a woman named Tamika Reeves. Denise didn't know her. But Tamika knew her. Dear Dr. Carter. You don't know me. We've never met. But I wanted to write to you because of something that happened to me 2 weeks ago. I was at the Fulton County Courthouse for my nephew's custody hearing. I'm a nurse, I work the night shift at Grady Memorial. I was tired. I was wearing scrubs. And I was scared because my nephew has been through so much, and I didn't know if the judge would let him stay with me. When I walked into the courthouse, a deputy stopped me. He was young, maybe 25. He asked me where I was going. He asked for my ID. He asked why I was in the restricted corridor. For a moment, I felt that old familiar feeling. That weight. That fear. That sense that I was being judged before I even opened my mouth. But then something happened. The deputy looked at my ID. He nodded. And he said, "The courtroom is down that hall, second door on the right. Good luck with your hearing." That was it. No handcuffs. No suspicion. No humiliation. Just respect. I stood there for a moment, not quite believing it. And then I walked to my nephew's hearing. And the judge ruled in my favor. And I brought my nephew home. I'm telling you this because I know why that deputy treated me differently. I know why things have changed at that courthouse. It's because of you. What you went through, what you demanded, changed everything. Not just for the women who came forward, but for women like me, who never even knew we needed protection until you stood up and fought. I don't know how to thank you for that. I don't know if thank you is even enough. But I wanted you to know that your courage made a difference. To me. To my nephew. To every black woman who walks into that building and is treated like a human being instead of a suspect. You didn't just win a case, Dr. Carter. You changed what justice looks like. With gratitude and love. Tamika Reeves. Denise read the letter 3 times. And then she cried. Not tears of pain. Tears of purpose. Tears that said, this. This is why we fight. 1 year later, Denise stood on the steps of the Georgia State Capitol. The governor was at the podium, signing a new law, the first comprehensive police accountability legislation in the state's history. The crowd was massive. Journalists, advocates, the 23 women, and families from across Georgia who had experienced what Denise had experienced, the casual cruelty of unchecked power. This law, the governor said, ensures that no complaint of bias or misconduct will ever be buried again. It guarantees independent oversight. It protects whistleblowers. And it sends a message to every officer in this state: your badge is a responsibility, not a right. He signed the document. The crowd erupted. Denise stood at the edge of the stage, watching. A reporter approached her. Dr. Carter, this legislation wouldn't exist without you. How does it feel to see this moment? Denise thought for a long moment. It feels like the beginning, she said finally. Not the end. There's still so much work to do. So many systems to fix. So many people to protect. She paused. But it also feels like proof. Proof that one person's worst moment can become a turning point for thousands. Proof that speaking up, even when it's painful, even when it's frightening, matters. The reporter nodded. Any message for women watching who have experienced similar treatment? Denise looked directly into the camera. Yes. Your story matters. Your voice matters. You are not invisible, and you are not alone. And if anyone ever tries to make you feel small, whether it's a deputy, a supervisor, or a system, remember this: your dignity doesn't stop at a red light. It doesn't stop at a courthouse door. It doesn't stop anywhere. She straightened her shoulders. You have every right to take up space. Every right to be treated with respect. Every right to demand accountability. She smiled, a small, fierce smile. And if they won't give you justice, you take it. The way we did. The camera clicked off. The crowd continued to cheer. And somewhere in that crowd, a young black woman, maybe 22, maybe 23, watched Denise Carter with tears streaming down her face. She didn't know yet that she would become an attorney. She didn't know yet that she would spend her career fighting for civil rights. She didn't know yet that one day she would stand on those same Capitol steps, signing her own legislation into law. All she knew, in that moment, was that something had shifted. Something in her. Something in the world. And it all started with one woman who refused to be silent. Denise Carter walked to her car that evening as the sun set over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire. She thought about Brian Hollister, sitting in his cell, stripped of everything he had once used to terrorize women like her. She thought about the 23 women who had found their voices after years of silence. She thought about Tamika Reeves and her nephew, building a new life because a young deputy had learned a new way to serve. And she thought about her mother, Lillian Carter, who had raised her in a 2-bedroom apartment in Chicago, who had worked double shifts as a hotel maid to pay for school supplies, who had told her every single night, "Baby, you were born with everything you need. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Denise got into her car. She gripped the steering wheel. And she smiled. Because her victory was more than personal. It was proof that dignity cannot be handcuffed. It was proof that courage is contagious. It was proof that when black women stand up, really stand up, with everything they have, the whole world has to pay attention. And it was a reminder to every mother, every daughter, every sister watching. Your power doesn't come from a title or a badge or a position. It comes from knowing who you are. It comes from refusing to be diminished. It comes from understanding that justice isn't given. It's taken. One truth at a time. One voice at a time. One woman at a time. Until the whole system has no choice but to change.